The galaxy was a busy place and had been for thousands of years. Hundreds of species traveled between stars and traded goods and shared knowledge and sometimes fought wars. The Galactic Council kept order as best as they could and made sure that no single species became too powerful or too dangerous. 47 different alien races sat on the council, and each one had a voice in how things were run. Earth had once been part of that community. Humans had discovered faster-than-light travel in the year 2157, and they had exploded into space with all the excitement and chaos that seemed to define their species. For 23 years, human ships had gone everywhere, and human traders had made deals, and human explorers had found new worlds, and human diplomats had argued in council chambers. They were loud and energetic and impossible to ignore. Commander Jake Morrison remembered those days clearly, even though they were now more than 2 centuries in the past. He had been young then and full of hope and piloting a small exploration ship called the Wanderer. His crew had been the first humans to make contact with the Vraxians, and that meeting had gone surprisingly well. The Vraxians were a crystalline species that communicated through patterns of light, and they had been curious about these strange mammals who talked so fast and moved so quickly. Jake had spent 3 months on the Vraxian homeworld, learning their customs and teaching them about Earth. He had made friends there and real ones. He had thought that humanity's future in the stars was bright and unlimited. Then the recall order came. Every human ship in space received the same message at the same time. Return to Earth immediately. No exceptions and no delays and no explanations given. Jake had tried to ask questions, but his superiors knew nothing. The order had come from the very top of Earth's government, and it was absolute. He remembered saying goodbye to his Vraxian friends. They had been confused and hurt. Ambassador Thelix had asked him why humans were leaving, and Jake had no answer to give. He could only promise that it was not because of anything the Vraxians had done. That promise felt hollow even as he made it. The journey back to Sol System had taken weeks, and during that entire time, Jake and his crew had speculated about what could cause such a drastic action. Was there a war coming? Had Earth discovered some terrible threat? Was the government collapsing? None of their theories made sense. When they finally arrived home, they were debriefed and their ship was decommissioned, and they were told to wait for further instructions. Those instructions never came. Weeks turned into months and months turned into years, and slowly Jake realized that humanity was not going back to the stars. Not yet, and maybe not ever. The official explanation was vague and unsatisfying. Humanity needed time to develop internally before continuing external expansion. Resources were being redirected to solve problems at home. The stars would still be there when Earth was ready. Jake had been angry at first and then depressed and finally accepting. He watched as Earth's government unified under a single banner, and as massive projects began to transform the solar system. The asteroid belt was mined and converted into habitats. Mars was terraformed slowly and carefully. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn became industrial centers and research stations, and through it all Earth remained silent. No messages were sent to the Galactic Council. No ships left Sol System. Humanity had turned inward completely. The aliens had noticed, of course. At first they had tried to make contact and sent diplomatic ships to the edge of human space. Those ships were politely but firmly turned away. Earth was not ready to talk. After a few years, the attempt stopped. The galaxy moved on without humanity. New species joined the Council, and old conflicts were resolved or reignited, and trade routes shifted, and the great cosmic dance continued. Humans became a footnote in galactic history, and then barely even that. The younger species knew nothing about them. The older species remembered but rarely spoke of it. On the Council Station Zenith Prime, the business of governing a galactic civilization continued as it always had. Disputes were mediated and laws were passed, and ambassadors from dozens of worlds argued about tariffs and territorial rights and 1,000 other small issues that somehow mattered. Enormously, Ambassador Kellen of the Thraxis Empire was one of the oldest members of the Council. He had 4 arms and skin like polished bronze and a mind that remembered when humans had first arrived. He had liked them despite their chaos. They had been refreshing in their honesty and their enthusiasm. Sometimes he wondered what had happened to them. Had they destroyed themselves in some civil war? Had a plague wiped them out? Or had they simply decided that the stars were not worth the effort? He would never know, and he had long since accepted that. Then one day, during a routine council session, an aide approached him with an urgent message. Kellen read it twice to make sure he understood correctly. Unusual energy signatures had been detected coming from the Sol system. Very unusual and very powerful. Whatever the humans had been doing for the past 2 centuries, it involved enormous amounts of energy. Kellen brought the information to the full council and watched as the chamber filled with speculation. Some species argued that the humans were building weapons. Others suggested they had discovered some new technology. A few thought it might be a natural phenomenon unrelated to humanity at all. The debate went on for hours until finally Council Speaker Orem called for order. Orem was a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline matrix, and they rarely spoke, but when they did, everyone listened. The decision was made to increase monitoring of the Sol system, but to take no direct action. If the humans wanted to contact the Council, they knew how. 3 weeks later, the message arrived. It was short and direct and sent on frequencies that the Council had not used in over 200 years. The translation was perfect and the voice was calm and professional. This is Captain Helen Brooks of the Earth Defense Initiative, and I am speaking on behalf of all humanity. We have been silent for 230 years, and we apologize for that silence. We had our reasons, and we believe they were good ones. Now we are ready to speak again. Humanity requests an audience with the Galactic Council. We have much to discuss and much to share. We hope you will hear us. We will await your response. The message ended and the council chamber erupted into chaos. The council chamber had never been so loud. 47 different species all tried to speak at once, and the translators struggled to keep up with the chaos. Some ambassadors were shouting in anger, while others demanded explanations, and a few simply sat in stunned silence. The humans had been gone for so long that many had assumed they were dead or had destroyed themselves. Now they were back and asking for an audience as if nothing had happened. Ambassador Kellen stood at his place and watched the chaos with something close to amusement. He had expected this reaction. The younger species had no memory of humanity, and they were confused about why this was such a significant moment. The older species remembered humans very well, and they had mixed feelings about their return. The Vraxians were excited and already calling for immediate contact. The Korvathi looked worried, and their military representative was whispering urgently into a communication device. Council Speaker Orem let the noise continue for several minutes before finally activating the chamber's harmonic resonator. A deep thrumming sound filled the space, and every voice fell silent. Orem's crystalline form pulsed with soft light as they spoke. We will discuss this matter in an orderly fashion. Each species will have an opportunity to voice their opinion. Then we will vote on how to proceed. The debate that followed lasted for 3 full days. Some species argued that humanity should be ignored completely. They had abandoned the galactic community and had no right to return now. Others insisted that any civilization that could remain hidden and silent for over 2 centuries deserved respect and caution. A few suggested that humanity might have developed dangerous technologies during their isolation and that the Council should prepare for a possible threat. The Vraxians spoke passionately about their old friendship with humans and how they had always wondered what happened to their curious mammalian friends. The Korvathi countered that in the 2 centuries since humanity's departure, they had expanded their own territory significantly, and they did not want competition from a returning power. The Zenthi proposed that humanity's return could be an opportunity for the entire galaxy to learn something new. Finally, Orem called for a decision. The Council would respond to humanity's message and would send a delegation to Earth to assess the situation. The delegation would be led by Ambassador Kellen and would include representatives from 6 other major species. They would travel to Sol system and meet with the humans and report back to the Council. Only then would any decisions be made about humanity's request to rejoin the galactic community. The vote passed with a strong majority. Kellen accepted his role as delegation leader without hesitation. He was curious about what the humans had been doing for so long, and he wanted answers. The delegation's ship was called the Concordance, and it was the finest diplomatic vessel in the entire galactic fleet. It had comfortable quarters for dozens of different species and conference rooms equipped with the best translation technology available in defensive systems that could withstand almost any attack. The ship was a symbol of the Council's power and prestige. They departed from Zenith Prime exactly 1 week after humanity's message arrived. The journey to Sol system would take about 2 weeks at standard diplomatic speed. During that time, the delegation reviewed every piece of information available about humanity. There was not much. The last reliable data was over 200 years old and showed a species that was technologically advanced but politically fractured and environmentally careless. What they had become since then was a complete mystery. Captain Helen Brooks was waiting for them at the edge of Sol system, but not in the way anyone expected. The Concordance's sensors detected nothing unusual as they approached the boundary of human space. Then suddenly there was a ship right next to them, not approaching from a distance but simply appearing as if it had been there all along. Every alarm on the Concordance started screaming at once. The ship was sleek and dark and gave off almost no energy signature despite clearly being active and functional. It was smaller than the Concordance but somehow more intimidating. No known technology could bypass sensors so completely. A communication channel opened and Captain Brooks appeared on every screen throughout the delegation ship. She looked to be in her middle years with gray hair pulled back and eyes that seemed to see everything. Her expression was calm and welcoming, but there was something in those eyes that suggested she had seen things that would terrify most beings. Welcome to Sol System. I apologize if our arrival startled you. Please follow us and we will guide you to Earth. We have much to show you. Kellen found his voice before anyone else could speak. Captain Brooks, how did your ship bypass our sensors? That technology is not possible with any known physics. Brooks smiled slightly. Ambassador Kellen, it is good to meet you. I have read much about you. As for your question, I promise all your questions will be answered soon. Please trust us for now. The Liberty began moving deeper into Sol system and the Concordance followed. The delegation crowded around sensor displays and viewing ports as they traveled. What they saw made no sense. The asteroid belt was gone. Not destroyed but converted. Thousands of habitats floated where rocks had once been, and each one housed millions of humans. The structures were elegant and efficient and powered by methods the delegation's scientists could not identify. Mars glowed with blue oceans and green continents where there should have been only red desert. The moons of Jupiter bristled with installations that made the Concordance's defensive systems look primitive. But it was Earth itself that left the delegation speechless. The planet was surrounded by a lattice of structures so vast and complex that it took several minutes just to comprehend the scale. The structures did not block the sun, but instead channeled its light and heat and directed it with perfect precision. The energy readings were beyond anything in the Council's databases. "What have you done?" Kellen whispered. Brooks's voice came through the speakers again, and there was pride in her tone. "We grew up, Ambassador. We took 230 years to become what we should have been from the beginning. Now let me show you what humanity has accomplished." The Concordance descended through Earth's atmosphere and landed at a facility in what had once been called Geneva. The city was beautiful beyond description. Buildings rose into the sky but were covered in living plants. The air was clean and fresh. People moved through streets that seemed designed for peace and efficiency, rather than chaos and conflict. Everything was ordered but not sterile. Everything was advanced but not cold. The delegation was escorted to a building that had somehow stood for over 400 years. Inside was a chamber designed to accommodate multiple species comfortably. At the center of the chamber stood a woman with dark skin and bright, intelligent eyes. She smiled as the delegation entered. "Welcome to Earth. I am Director Lisa Grant, and I speak for all of humanity. Thank you for coming. I know you have many questions. Let me begin by answering the most important one. Why did we leave the galaxy? Why did we stay silent for so long? The answer is simple. We were not ready to be part of the galactic community, so we fixed ourselves first." Director Lisa Grant activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The delegation watched as images of Earth appeared before them. It was Earth as it had been in the year 2180, and it looked terrible. The planet was crowded with cities that sprawled across continents. The oceans were gray and lifeless. The air was thick with pollution. 12 billion humans lived on that world, and it was clear that the planet was dying under their weight. "This was us when we left the galactic community," Grant said quietly. "We had the technology to travel between stars, but we were killing our own homeworld. We were fighting wars over resources. We had 30 different governments that could barely agree on anything. We were expanding into space, but we were doing it badly. We were like children playing with weapons we did not understand." The hologram shifted and showed human ships scattered across dozens of star systems. Some were trading posts, some were mining operations, some were military outposts. There was no coordination between them. Each one operated independently, and sometimes they even competed against each other. We realized something important during those first 23 years in space, Grant continued. We met species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Species that had solved problems we were still fighting over. Species that had learned to work together. And we realized that we were not like them. We were too young, too aggressive, too divided. Kellen leaned forward in his seat. His forearms were folded across his chest in a gesture of deep thought. So you decided to leave. To isolate yourselves, yes, Grant said. It was the hardest decision humanity ever made. We had finally reached the stars, and then we chose to walk away from them. But we knew that if we continued the way we were going, we would either destroy ourselves or become a problem for the entire galaxy. Neither option was acceptable. The hologram changed again and showed the recall of every human ship. Thousands of vessels turning around and heading back to Sol system. Then it showed Earth's borders closing, communication channels going dark, the silence beginning. We spent the first 50 years just unifying ourselves, Grant explained. Every nation on Earth agreed to join a single government. It was not easy. There were protests and resistance and moments when we almost fell back into conflict.
But we knew it was necessary.
We could not be a divided species and also be a responsible member of the galactic community, Captain. Helen Brooks stepped forward to stand beside Grant. The next 80 years were spent cleaning our planet and expanding carefully through our solar system. We developed new technologies for environmental restoration. We learned how to build habitats that could support millions without destroying ecosystems. We terraformed Mars slowly over decades instead of rushing the process. We made mistakes, but we learned from them. The hologram showed the transformation of Sol system in fast motion. The asteroid belt being mined and converted, habitats appearing around every planet, Mars turning from red to blue and green, ships moving in perfect coordination as they built and expanded and improved. And for the last 100 years, Grant said, we have been studying you, all of you. That statement caused a stir among the delegation. Several ambassadors stood and began speaking at once. Kellen raised one hand for silence. Explain what you mean by studying us. We listened, Brooks said simply. We monitored every transmission that left your worlds. We recorded every public communication. We learned all 47 of your languages. We studied your histories and your cultures and your philosophies. We watched your wars and your peace treaties and your trade agreements. We became experts on galactic civilization without being part of it. Grant nodded. We needed to understand what we would be joining. We needed to learn from your successes and your mistakes. And most importantly, we needed to become worthy of joining you. We did not want to return to the galaxy as the same chaotic species that had left. We wanted to return as something better. The hologram shifted once more and showed data streams flowing from various parts of the galaxy toward Sol system. Millions of transmissions being captured and analyzed and stored. The sheer scale of the surveillance was staggering. Was this not a violation of our privacy? Asked the Korvathi representative. His scales were raised in a sign of agitation. You spied on all of us for 2 centuries. We monitored public communications only, Grant said calmly. We did not hack private systems or steal secrets. We simply listened to what you were broadcasting openly into space. Any species with sufficient technology could do the same. We just chose to do it very carefully and very quietly. Kellen considered this for a long moment. And what did you learn from all this listening? Brooks smiled. We learned that the galaxy is a complicated place. We learned that even species that have been traveling the stars for millennia still struggle with the same basic problems. How to balance individual freedom with collective security. How to share resources fairly. How to resolve conflicts without war. How to grow without destroying. These are universal challenges. We also learned, Grant added, that humanity has something valuable to offer. Our long isolation gave us a unique perspective. We watched 47 species interact for 200 years. We saw patterns that might not be visible from inside the system. We developed technologies focused on restoration and sustainability, rather than expansion and exploitation. We learned patience. The hologram faded, and Grant looked directly at each member of the delegation in turn. We are not asking to return to our old position in the galactic community. We know we abandoned that and we accept the consequences. What we are asking is for a chance to prove that we have changed. A chance to show that humanity can be a positive force in the galaxy. A chance to contribute rather than just consume. And how do you propose to prove this? Kellen asked. Grant and Brooks exchanged glances. Then Grant spoke. "We have a demonstration prepared. There is a problem that has plagued the galactic community for over a century, a problem that every species has tried to solve and failed. We believe we can fix it. If we succeed, it will show that humanity has truly changed. If we fail, then we will accept that we are not ready and we will return to our isolation." The Korvathi representative leaned forward. "What problem are you talking about?" "The Thorngate expanse," Brooks said. "We want to restore it." The chamber fell completely silent. Every member of the delegation stared at the two humans in disbelief. The Thorngate expanse was a region of space that had been destroyed by ancient weapons during a war that happened before most current species had achieved spaceflight. The fabric of space itself was torn and twisted there. Radiation made it impassable. Dozens of colonies had been cut off from the rest of the galaxy because of it. Every attempt to repair the damage had failed completely. "That is impossible," the Zenthi representative said softly. "We have tried for over 100 years, Grant smiled. "We know, we studied every attempt. We learned from every failure, and during our isolation we developed new technologies specifically designed for this kind of restoration. We cannot guarantee success, but we believe we have a real chance." Kellen stood slowly. His bronze skin gleamed in the chamber's light. "If you could truly restore the Thorngate expanse, it would change everything. Entire worlds would be reconnected. Trade routes would reopen. But the risk is enormous. If your attempt fails, it could make the damage worse." "We understand the risk," Brooks said. "That is why we are asking for permission rather than simply attempting it on our own. We want to work with the Council. We want your scientists to observe and verify everything we do. We want this to be a collaboration." Grant stepped forward. "Humanity spent 230 years learning to be better. Now we want to prove it. Give us this chance. Let us show you what we have become." The Council debated for 2 weeks before finally granting humanity permission to attempt the restoration of the Thorngate expanse. The vote was close and many species had serious doubts. The risk was enormous. If the human attempt failed, it could make the damaged region even worse. It could spread the spatial distortions to neighboring systems. It could kill millions of people on the colony worlds that were already struggling to survive near the expanse. But the potential reward was equally enormous. The Thorngate expanse cut through a major section of the galaxy like a scar. 42 colony worlds were isolated because of it. Trade routes that should have taken days instead took months as ships were forced to go around the damaged region. Resources that could have enriched dozens of systems were trapped and unreachable. For over a century, the expanse had been a problem that everyone wanted solved, but no one could fix. Ambassador Kellen voted in favor of letting humanity try. He had seen what they accomplished in their own solar system. He had witnessed technology that seemed impossible. He believed they deserved a chance even if that chance was small. The demonstration was scheduled to begin exactly 1 month after the Council vote. That gave time for observer ships from every major species to travel to the Thorngate expanse. The Council wanted documentation of everything that happened. Scientists and military officers and diplomats from across the galaxy gathered to watch. Humanity either succeed spectacularly or fail. Catastrophically, 3 human ships arrived at the edge of the expanse right on schedule. The Liberty was there with Captain Helen Brooks in command. 2 other vessels accompanied her, and they were unlike anything the observers had seen before. They were massive cylindrical ships that seemed to be more machine than vessel. Their hulls were covered in equipment that defied easy analysis. Energy readings suggested they carried power sources capable of running entire planetary civilizations. Brooks addressed the assembled observer fleet from the bridge of the Liberty. Her image appeared on screens throughout dozens of ships, and her voice was calm and confident. "Thank you all for being here. What you are about to witness is the culmination of 80 years of research and development. We have studied the Thorngate expanse extensively. We understand the nature of the damage. We believe we can repair it. The process will take 4 days. During that time, we ask that all observer vessels remain at a safe distance. We will broadcast all our sensor data in real time, so your scientists can monitor every step." The 2 massive human ships moved into position on opposite sides of the expanse. The damaged region was roughly 3 light-years across, and the spatial distortions within it were visible even to the naked eye. Space itself seemed to ripple and twist. Stars behind the expanse appeared stretched and distorted. Readings showed radiation levels that would kill any known biological life form in seconds. Brooks began the procedure with a simple countdown. When she reached zero, the two massive ships activated simultaneously. Energy poured out of them in streams that were visible across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. The streams reached into the expanse and began weaving a pattern that looked almost like a net or a web. Slowly and carefully, the human ships were creating a structure made of pure energy that surrounded the damaged region completely. The observer fleet watched in silence as the process continued. Hours passed and the energy web grew more complex and more dense. Human technicians worked with absolute precision, making constant tiny adjustments to keep the pattern stable. Any mistake could cause the entire structure to collapse and possibly trigger a catastrophic reaction. On the second day, the web was complete. It surrounded the Thorngate expanse like a cocoon and pulsed with power that made sensors scream warnings. Then the human ships began the next phase. They started sending pulses through the web in carefully timed sequences. Each pulse carried specific frequencies and harmonics that had been calculated down to the smallest decimal point. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The spatial distortions inside the expanse began to shift. The ripples in space started to smooth out. The twisted physics that had made the region impassable began to normalize. It was like watching a wound heal in fast motion. Scientists on the observer ships could barely believe what they were seeing. The Zenthi had attempted something similar 50 years ago, and their effort had failed within hours. The Korvathi had tried a military solution using massive force to simply punch through the distortions, and that had made things worse. Dozens of other approaches had been tested over the decades and none had worked. Yet somehow the humans were succeeding. On the third day, the radiation levels inside the expanse began to drop. The deadly energy that had filled the region for over a century was being absorbed and neutralized by the web. Ships that ventured close to the edge with heavy shielding reported that the danger was decreasing by the hour. By the fourth day, the transformation was nearly complete. The Thorngate expanse no longer looked like a scar across space. The distortions were gone. The radiation was at background levels. Stars were visible through the region without any distortion. Sensors showed that the fabric of space had been restored to its natural state. Captain Brooks sent one final transmission to the observer fleet. The restoration is complete. We are now going to send a probe through the expanse to verify that it is safe for travel. If successful, we will then send a manned ship. We invite representatives from the observer fleet to join us on that flight. The probe passed through the expanse without incident. Every sensor confirmed that the region was now completely normal and safe. Then the Liberty itself entered the expanse with a dozen small ships from various species following behind. They crossed the entire 3 light-year distance in a matter of hours using standard faster-than-light drives. What had once been an impassable barrier was now just ordinary space. When they emerged on the other side, they were greeted by ships from the isolated colony worlds. Those colonists had been cut off from the rest of the galaxy for generations. They had watched the restoration happen and they knew what it meant. Their isolation was over. They could rejoin the galactic community. The celebration that followed was broadcast across every inhabited system. People from hundreds of worlds watched as human and alien crews embraced and cheered together. The impossible had become possible. The Thorngate expanse was healed. Ambassador Kellen stood on the bridge of his observation ship and watched the celebration with all 4 of his arms raised in the Thrax's gesture of profound respect. Around him, his crew was equally moved. The Vraxian science officer had tears of joy flowing down her crystalline face. The Korvathi military observer stood at rigid attention as if witnessing something sacred. They actually did it, someone whispered. Kellen nodded slowly. They did more than that. They proved that humanity has changed. The species that left the galaxy 230 years ago could never have accomplished this. They were too impatient and too aggressive and too focused on quick results. But the humans who returned are different. They are patient. They are careful. They are wise. The observer fleet began its journey back to Zenith Prime. The trip took 2 weeks, and during that entire time the crews talked about nothing but what they had witnessed. Human technology had accomplished in 4 days what the rest of the galaxy had failed to do in over a century. But more important than the technology was what it represented. Humanity had spent their isolation becoming something better. They had learned lessons that took other species thousands of years to master. When the fleet arrived at Zenith Prime, the council was already in session. Every species wanted to hear the full report. Kellen and the other observers described everything they had seen in detail. They showed recordings of the restoration process. They presented data that confirmed the expanse was now completely safe. The debate that followed was surprisingly brief. Species that had been skeptical about humanity were now convinced. Species that had been worried about human intentions were now reassured. Species that had been uncertain about allowing humanity back into the galactic community were now eager to welcome them. Director Lisa Grant and Captain Helen Brooks stood before the council and waited for the decision. They had done everything they promised to do. They had proven that humanity could contribute something valuable to the galaxy. Now it was up to the council to decide if that was enough. Council Speaker Orem rose and their crystalline form glowed with bright light. Humanity has demonstrated wisdom and capability beyond what anyone expected. You have solved a problem that plagued the galaxy for generations. You have reconnected worlds and restored hope. The council will now vote on your petition to rejoin the galactic community. Grant and Brooks held their breath as the voting began. They had worked for this moment for over 2 centuries. Everything humanity had accomplished during their isolation had been building toward this single decision. Soon they would know if it had all been worth it. The vote took place 3 weeks after the restoration of the Thorngate expanse. Every member of the Galactic Council gathered in the Grand Chamber on Zenith Prime, and the tension in the air was thick enough to touch. Humanity had accomplished something that was supposed to be impossible. They had healed a wound in space itself that had existed for over a century. Now the Council had to decide whether to accept them back into the galactic community. Ambassador Kellen stood before the assembled representatives and delivered his report. He spoke for 2 hours describing everything the delegation had witnessed on Earth and in Sol System. He explained the technological advances humanity had made during their isolation. He detailed the restoration process they had used on the Thorngate expanse. He answered every question that was asked with patience and thoroughness. When he finished speaking, Council Speaker Orem called for the vote. The chamber fell silent as each species cast their decision. The voting system displayed the results in real time on a massive screen that everyone could see. One by one the votes appeared, and every single one was the same. 47 votes in favor. 0 votes against. 0 abstentions. Humanity was unanimously accepted back into the Galactic Council. Captain Helen Brooks was watching the vote from Earth, along with Director Lisa Grant and thousands of other humans who had worked toward this moment for over 2 centuries. When the final vote appeared on the screen, the room erupted in celebration. People were hugging and crying and laughing all at once. Brooks felt tears running down her own face, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "We did it," Grant said quietly beside her. "We actually did it," Brooks nodded. Now the real work begins, and she was right. Humanity did not just join the Galactic Council. They transformed it. Within the first year, human engineers were working alongside alien scientists to apply restoration technology to other damaged regions of space. 3 sectors that had been abandoned for decades were reclaimed and made habitable again. Colonies that had been isolated for generations were reconnected to the galactic community. Human diplomats trained in centuries of conflict resolution began mediating disputes between species. Their unique perspective as outsiders who had studied the galaxy for so long gave them insights that surprised everyone. A territorial conflict between the Korvathi and the Zenthi that had dragged on for 15 years was resolved in 6 months with human mediation. A trade dispute that threatened to collapse an entire economic zone was settled through a framework that human economists designed. The council chamber itself changed. Where there had once been 47 seats, there were now 48. The human representative sat among equals and contributed ideas that challenged old assumptions and opened new possibilities. Within 5 years, humanity had proposed 17 major initiatives, and 14 of them had been adopted by the full council. But the changes went deeper than just politics and technology. Humanity brought something else to the galaxy. They brought hope. The younger species looked at Earth and saw proof that a civilization could recognize its own flaws and choose to fix them. They saw that it was possible to step back from disaster and build something better. They saw that patience and wisdom could be learned even by a species as chaotic as humans had once been. The older species found themselves challenged in ways they had not expected. Humans asked questions that no one had thought to ask before. Why were certain systems considered impossible to restore when the technology clearly existed? Why did some species have more influence than others when the council was supposed to be equal? Why was expansion always prioritized over sustainability when resources were limited? Not everyone liked these questions. Some species found humanity's presence uncomfortable. The Corvathi in particular struggled with the fact that humans had gone from being absent to being influential so quickly. But even the critics had to admit that the galaxy was better with humanity in it than without. Jake Morrison lived to see it all. The life extension treatments that humanity had developed during their isolation meant that he was now over 250 years old, but still healthy and active. He had been young when humanity first reached the stars, and he had been devastated when they retreated. Now he stood on the observation deck of Zenith Prime and watched human ships working alongside vessels from dozens of other species. Captain Brooks found him there one day. She was equally old and equally rejuvenated. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, just watching the view. "Do you ever think about those early days?" Morrison asked finally. "When we first left Earth and everything seemed so exciting and new?" Brooks nodded. "All the time. We were so eager back then, so ready to take on the galaxy. We thought we were ready for anything." "We were wrong," Morrison said. "Yes," Brooks agreed. "But we learned. That is what matters." Morrison turned to look at her. Was it worth it, though? 230 years of isolation. All those generations that never got to see the stars. All that time spent fixing ourselves instead of exploring. Brooks considered the question carefully. She looked out at the ships below them. Human crews were working with Vraxian partners on a joint scientific mission. A human captain was training a group of young Zenthi officers in advanced navigation techniques. Human children were growing up speaking multiple alien languages and playing with friends from a dozen different worlds. "Yes," she said firmly, "it was worth it. The old humans would have tried to dominate. We would have competed and fought and probably made enemies. We would have been a problem for the galaxy instead of a partner. But we chose differently. We chose to grow up first," Morrison smiled. "And now we help others grow." "Exactly," Brooks said. "We share what we learned. We offer our perspective. We work together to solve problems that no single species could handle alone. That is what the galactic community should be." Far below them, a human ship docked with the station. Morrison could see through the viewports as people disembarked. Humans and aliens walking together and talking and laughing. It was such a simple thing, but it meant everything. On Earth, Director Lisa Grant was preparing for a conference with representatives from 12 different species. They were planning a massive project to restore an entire star cluster that had been damaged by a natural disaster 3 centuries ago. The project would take 50 years and require resources from every participating species. It was exactly the kind of collaborative effort that would have been impossible before humanity's return. Grant looked over the project plans and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Her ancestors had made the hardest choice imaginable. They had given up glory and adventure and exploration so that future generations could be worthy of those things. They had sacrificed their dreams so that humanity could become something better, and it had worked. Across the galaxy, humans were making a difference. They were not conquering or dominating or imposing their will. They were cooperating and learning and teaching and growing alongside everyone else. They were proving that change was possible and that wisdom could be gained and that even a species that seemed hopeless could become something remarkable. The age of human isolation was over. The age of human cooperation had truly begun. In council chambers and laboratories and ships and stations throughout the galaxy, humans worked beside aliens as equals and friends. They brought their unique perspective and their hard-won wisdom and their determination to make things better. They brought hope that problems could be solved and conflicts could be resolved, and that the future could be brighter than the past. Earth had stayed quiet for 230 years. During that silence, humanity had transformed itself from a chaotic, divided species into something that the galaxy needed. When they finally spoke again, their words carried weight because they had earned the right to be heard. Everything had changed, not just for humanity, but for the entire galactic community. The return of Earth had reminded everyone that growth was possible and that patience was valuable and that sometimes the bravest thing to do was admit you were not ready and take the time to become ready. The galaxy was better for having humans in it, and humanity was better for having learned to be worthy of the galaxy. Together they built something that neither could have built alone. Together they reached toward a future that was brighter than anyone had imagined possible, and it all started because Earth chose to stay quiet and grow up before speaking again.